They moved me into the horse stable. I moved my money into a trust. Without them. An old, useless mare like you should be sleeping with maggots, not wandering around my house. You are a disgrace." Charlotte's voice sliced through the marble-floored living room, sharp and deliberate, each word hitting harder than the last. Stephen stood by the staircase, eyes on the ground, saying nothing. His silence hurt more than her words ever could. I held the small silver-framed photo of my late husband in my trembling hands. It was the last thing I had packed before leaving Texas. In that instant, every memory of the home we built, every Sunday breakfast, every soft laugh between storms, faded like the dust on that frame. The house smelled of roses and bleach, too clean to feel alive. Charlotte crossed her arms, her perfume thick in the air. She smiled without warmth. "The room upstairs is being renovated," she said, each syllable dipped in contempt. "You can stay in the back for now. There's a space by the old stable." I blinked, unsure if I heard right. "The stable?" "Yes," she said lightly. "The horses are gone, but it's spacious. You'll manage. Old mares like you are used to that smell anyway." Stephen looked up for a second, but then lowered his head again. I forced a small smile, the kind you give when you realize kindness won't be returned. "It's all right, dear. I'll be fine." That was my mistake, trying to sound fine in a house that had no room for kindness. 2 days earlier, he had called me, voice gentle, rehearsed almost. "Mom, you shouldn't live alone anymore. It's dangerous at your age. Come to Nevada. We've got plenty of space. Lucas misses you." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. After my husband passed, the silence in the Texas house had become unbearable. So I sold it, the place where I'd spent 50 years of my life, and packed what I thought mattered. My husband's photograph, a few dresses, and the box of letters from my brother, the one who'd left me his shares in that oil company no one talked about anymore. When I arrived, no one was at the airport. I waited for an hour until a driver approached, holding a sign with my name. "Mrs. Bennett," they sent me. At the house, the maid opened the door. "You can wait outside, ma'am. They're having dinner." Dinner. My family was having dinner, and I was a guest on the porch. Charlotte finally appeared, perfect as a magazine cover, red lips, diamond earrings, her posture stiff as porcelain. She looked me over like an antique she didn't want. Now, as her voice echoed in my head, I realized something quietly cruel had already begun long before she called me a mare. I set my husband's photo down on the counter, careful not to scratch the glass, and looked toward the door that led outside. The air there smelled of dry earth and the faint sweetness of hay. "Where is this stable you mentioned?" I asked softly. She smirked. "Out back. You'll find it. Try not to trip." Stephen mumbled something about work, grabbed his jacket, and left before my eyes could meet his. I stood there for a long while, watching the sun dip behind the Nevada hills, the light turning gold on the fence posts. I thought of my classroom back in Texas, the smell of chalk, the laughter of children, the sound of pencils scratching paper. In those days, people listened when I spoke. Here, I was nothing but an inconvenience. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. The stable was at the edge of the property. It wasn't a stable anymore, just a shell of wood and rusted iron, with old straw on the floor and a broken lantern hanging from the beam. A faint smell of manure lingered in the air, mixed with the dust of neglect. I placed my bags down on a wooden crate and sat for a moment. The boards creaked under my weight. I could see the house from here, its tall windows glowing with warm light, shadows of laughter moving behind the curtains. My family was inside, eating dinner, maybe even talking about me. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, sharp in my lungs. When you lose everything familiar, even humiliation feels like company. I looked at my hands, rough from years of teaching, cooking, raising a child alone. Hands that once wiped tears from Stephen's face now rested on my knees, empty. A moth fluttered around the lantern, its wings tapping the glass like desperate whispers. "Old mare," I murmured. That's what she called me. The words tasted bitter. But in that bitterness, I felt something stir. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. A resolve. Because people like Charlotte forget, even an old mare knows when it's time to kick. I spread the thin blanket I had carried from Texas across the cot. The night was already crawling in through the gaps in the walls, cold and uninviting. I lay down, staring at the roof beams where spiders had built their kingdoms. I whispered to the darkness, "It's fine. I've survived worse." But as the first tear slipped down my cheek, I realized this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about remembering who I was before they decided I was nothing. That night, under the smell of hay and rust, I fell asleep to the echo of Charlotte's voice and the ghost of my husband's. And for the first time in my life, I prayed not for love, but for clarity. That was the first honest prayer of my life, whispered not to heaven, but to whatever piece of me was still awake inside the dark. The first mornings in the stable smelled of damp straw and quiet humiliation. The walls were old pine, splintered and warped by years of Nevada heat. When the wind came through, the boards groaned like tired bones. A single light bulb dangled from a wire twisted around a nail. It flickered every few minutes, humming faintly as if it too was holding its breath. The floor was packed dirt, patched with a few squares of brittle hay that clung to my shoes when I walked. The latch on the door turned from the outside only. Charlotte said it was for safety. I knew better. I kept my bag close, though there wasn't much inside: 2 dresses, my husband's old sweater, and a book I could no longer read without squinting. From where I slept, I could see the edge of their kitchen window glowing in the distance. Laughter spilled through it sometimes, sharp and loud, reminding me of the world I was no longer welcome in. Charlotte made it clear on the second day. "When we have guests, please stay out back," she said, smiling that rehearsed, camera-ready smile. "I don't want the smell of old age around the dinner table." Old age, she wore the word like perfume, sweet and cruel at once. Lucas ran by me once, chasing a ball across the yard. "Hi, Grandma," he shouted, and for a second my heart lifted until Charlotte's voice cut through the air. "Lucas, what did I tell you?" "Her name is Julie." The boy froze, confused, then whispered, "Sorry, Julie," before running off. Stephen came out that evening with his phone pressed to his ear. "I'm working late, Mom. Big project," he said. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His hairline was receding, his shirt crisp and white. He looked so much like his father that it ached. I wanted to ask if he still liked peanut butter sandwiches, if he remembered the time I carried him home after he broke his shoe in the rain. But his car engine started before I could open my mouth. At night, the stable turned colder. I would light a candle in an old jar and sit on the edge of the cot, listening to the coyotes in the hills. I remembered another night, decades ago, when Stephen was 10 and came home with a bruised lip. He had been bullied by older boys on his way from school. He had cried into my apron, his small hands clutching at my waist. "Mom, why are they mean to me?" he asked. I had walked 2 miles with him to the next morning's class, hand in hand, and waited outside until recess to make sure no one hurt him again. Now, that same boy locked the door behind me each night. It's strange how time changes the direction of cruelty. The ones you once protected learn to protect themselves from you. The smell of manure clung to my clothes, no matter how many times I beat the dust out of them. One afternoon, Charlotte handed me a bottle of air freshener through the half-open door. "For your place," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Try to keep it from drifting toward the patio." I wanted to say something sharp, something that would remind her I was more than the stench she imagined, but I didn't. Words are expensive when no one's listening. Instead, I spent my days sweeping the dirt floor, organizing what little I had, folding the same blanket again and again. Sometimes I spoke to the walls, pretending they could answer. When I grew tired of silence, I listened to the hum of the light bulb and imagined it as a heartbeat, steady, patient, waiting for something to change. One evening, as the sunset burned the hills orange, Charlotte called out from the porch, her voice coated with sugar. "Julie, dear, could you please not come into the house this week? We're hosting friends from the firm. You understand, right? Presentation matters." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Presentation mattered. Later that night, I sat outside on the small wooden stool, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert sky was endless, the kind of sky you could fall into if you weren't careful. I thought about patience, how it used to be a virtue I taught my students. Be patient, and good things will come. But patience in the face of cruelty is not virtue, it's surrender dressed as grace. I wasn't angry yet. Anger is hot, and I was still too cold for that. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, a stillness before a storm. As the coyotes howled in the distance and the house lights blinked out one by one, I whispered to the dark wood around me, "Maybe they'll remember kindness when it's gone." The wind answered by rattling the latch on the outside of the door, that single metal click sealing me in. And in that tiny sound, I heard the beginning of everything that would follow. It was Lucas's 8th birthday, and the house smelled of perfume, roast beef, and expensive candles. Balloons floated from the chandelier, and a long red carpet stretched across the floor like a stage where I did not belong. Charlotte had invited more than 40 people, clients, neighbors, friends from her firm. The whole place glittered. Everyone wore something shiny, except me. From the stable, I could hear the laughter. I watched through the small window until the ache in my chest pushed me toward the small stove I had set up outside. I wanted to cook something, just one dish that might remind Stephen of home: lobster porridge, his favorite when he was a boy. I bought the lobster myself that morning, walking nearly a mile to the market because I didn't want Charlotte to know. The fishmonger had wrapped it in old newspaper, and I carried it back like a secret. As I stirred the porridge, the smell of ginger and butter rose into the dry air. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I could see Stephen as a child again, sitting on our kitchen counter, swinging his legs, asking, "Mom, is it ready yet?" I smiled at the memory. Maybe tonight he'd smile too. Maybe Charlotte would remember I was family. When the guests began to sing Happy Birthday, I took the small pot, wiped the handle clean, and carried it carefully toward the house. The door was open, the light almost blinding after the dusk outside. I stepped in quietly, hoping no one would notice the dirt on my shoes. Charlotte turned, her laughter freezing mid-air. "Oh God, what is that smell?" Her voice rose above the music. Heads turned, conversations stopped. "Did you cook this in the barn again?" My hands trembled, but I tried to keep my smile. "It's lobster porridge," I said softly. "Stephen used to love it." She covered her nose dramatically. "Dear Lord, it smells like manure." A few people chuckled. Stephen's face flushed red. He looked at the guests, not at me. "Mom, just maybe put it down. You didn't have to." The pot slipped. The sound of it hitting the carpet was louder than the laughter that followed. Golden broth splashed across Charlotte's red designer rug, the lobster tails rolling under the table like guilty things. For a second, there was silence. Then Charlotte screamed, "This old mare just ruined my floor," she shouted, her voice breaking into a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Can someone get a towel before the smell sets in?" Everyone laughed then, the kind of laughter that isn't joy, but cruelty disguised as amusement. I bent down slowly, my knees cracking, and began to wipe the spill with the edge of my shawl. The fabric soaked through instantly. My hands shook, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford tears in front of them. Stephen knelt beside me for a moment, his whisper tight and embarrassed. "Mom, please, just go. Don't make a scene." Don't make a scene. As if my existence was already a disturbance. I pressed the wet shawl against the rug again, and the guests went back to chatting, their voices distant and hollow. I felt like a ghost, fading back into the corners of a house that once belonged to me in love, if not in name. Then, through the noise, I saw him. Richard Cole, standing by the doorway, holding a glass of wine he hadn't touched. His eyes weren't full of pity, they were full of memory. The same blue-gray eyes that had looked at me 50 years ago when we graduated, when he said, "You deserve a world that listens." No one else in that room saw me, but he did. When the evening ended, I slipped out quietly, clutching the empty pot against my chest like a shield. The desert night was cool, and the lights from the house glowed soft and golden behind me. As the guests' laughter drifted through the open windows, a low voice called from behind, "Julie Bennett," he said, stepping into the porch light. I turned. He looked older, his hair silver, but his stance strong. "Still you, isn't it?" he asked gently. "Still the same woman who stands tall, even when they push her down." I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He hesitated, then smiled, small and sad. "Then don't let them break you, Julie." I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the red rug, visible through the window, the stain already fading under the hands of the cleaners. But I knew what they couldn't scrub away. That night, as I walked back to the stable, the smell of lobster still clinging to my hands, I realized something had cracked inside me, not in defeat, but in awakening. They thought I was broken. But in truth, I was just beginning to remember my strength. That night the cold came early. The wind slipped through every crack in the wooden walls, whistling like an old ghost. The thermometer outside the window read 37 degrees, but inside the stable it felt colder, like the air itself refused to touch me with warmth. The small gas heater that Stephen had promised to fix stood in the corner, silent, useless. Charlotte had turned off the valve that afternoon, saying she didn't want a fire hazard near the house. I wrapped my husband's sweater tighter around me, but the chill crawled under it anyway. My breath came out in small white clouds. The lantern flickered, and each time the light dimmed, I imagined the darkness swallowing me whole. I sat up on the cot, rubbing my hands together. The joints ached the way old wood does before it cracks. I looked around the space, just a cot, a chair, a box I used as a table, and the photo of my husband propped against the wall. In that weak light, he looked almost alive, his eyes as kind as the day we met in the library at college. I whispered to the picture, "It's cold again, Henry. But at least the silence still knows my name." Memories came like a flood, uninvited but relentless. 30 years of teaching, 30 years of chalk dust, spelling tests, little hands clutching pencils, and the smell of rain on playground dirt. I used to tell my students that kindness was the only subject that mattered. I believed that then. After school, I'd walk home to Stephen, still in his uniform, his eyes bright with questions. I worked double shifts to pay for his textbooks, sewed other people's curtains at night, and skipped new shoes so he could join every field trip. I thought love was something you proved by giving. Now, I knew better. Love, without respect, turns into currency, and once people start counting, it runs out. I pulled the blanket higher, but my teeth still chattered. A thin line of frost had begun to creep along the window pane. I thought of Charlotte, probably asleep on her heated mattress, dreaming of promotions and dinner parties. I thought of Stephen, lying beside her, pretending not to hear his mother coughing outside. I pressed my palms together. "I used to believe love was constant," I whispered to the dark. "But nothing stays constant when money sits higher than blood." The words hung in the air like smoke, soft but unbreakable. When the lantern sputtered out, I stayed awake, staring into the dark. The stillness around me was loud, the kind of silence that bends time, stretching every second into something heavy. Somewhere in that silence, I realized I was done waiting for kindness to return. I reached for the small tin box under my cot and pulled out a folded sheet of stationery, yellowed from age. It was the last page from the notebook I had once used to grade essays. My hands trembled as I wrote, but the letters came out steady. "Richard, it's been too many years since I last wrote to anyone who remembered me as more than someone's mother or someone's burden. I don't need help. I just need to remember that there was a time when I stood taller than pity. I need to remember who I was before I became a guest in my own bloodline." I paused, the pen hovering above the paper. The sound of the wind outside had softened. Even the coyotes were quiet. I thought of the night 50 years ago when Richard and I had danced at our graduation party, when he told me I had a teacher's voice, soft but strong enough to move the stubborn. I had laughed then, young and certain the world was kind. I added one last line. "I need to see you, not to ask for anything, but to remember myself." I signed my name slowly, Julie Bennett, and folded the page. I didn't have an envelope, so I slipped it between 2 old library cards, tied it with a ribbon from my teaching days, and placed it on the stool by the door. I would deliver it tomorrow, somehow. The wind picked up again, rattling the latch. I lay back, staring at the roof beams, each one shadowed like ribs against the thin skin of the ceiling. My body shook, but inside, something had gone still. Before sleep took me, I whispered into the dark, "They think I'm finished, Henry, but maybe this winter is just the sharpening of the blade." Outside, the desert stars burned quietly, millions of small, cold witnesses to a decision no one else would see. And somewhere far off, maybe in a house with real heat and light, a man named Richard Cole would soon find a letter waiting for him, one written not from weakness, but from the beginning of a storm. The cafe in Reno was small and quiet, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee tasted like secrets kept warm too long. I arrived early, sitting near the window with my coat buttoned to the neck, the cold still clinging to me from the bus ride. When the bell over the door chimed, I didn't have to look up. I could feel him before I saw him. "Julie Bennett," Richard said softly, his voice still carrying that calm authority I remembered. Still the same girl I once knew, always fighting, even when no one sees the battle. I turned, and there he was. Older, yes, his hair silver now, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes hadn't changed. They still held that strange mix of intelligence and kindness that once made me feel safe in a world that rarely was. "I don't fight anymore, Richard," I said, forcing a small smile. "I'm too tired for that." He sat across from me, removing his gloves carefully, as if time might break between his fingers. "Then why did you ask me here?" I stirred the sugar in my cup, though I didn't need it. "Because I don't want to fight," I said quietly. "I want silence, but I refuse to be buried under it." He studied me for a long moment. "You sound like someone who's already made a decision." "I have." I pulled out the envelope, the same one that had carried my brother's oil company shares, untouched for years. "This is everything I own, Richard. My brother's legacy, my life's savings, the only thing in this world that has not been taken from me. I want you to build something with it." His brows furrowed. "Something?" "A trust," I said. "The Bennett Trust." He leaned back, surprise flickering across his face. "A trust fund? Julie, that's a heavy thing to manage. What do you plan to do with it?" "I want every cent transferred into a clean structure under a new name, Solar West Energy LLC. You'll handle the paperwork, the incorporation, the secrecy." He was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "And who are the beneficiaries?" I met his eyes, my voice steady. "No one with my blood." He set down his coffee cup carefully, the porcelain clicking against the saucer. "You mean—" "Yes," I interrupted. "No one in my family is to inherit a single dollar. The trust is to be used for women like me, the ones forgotten after giving everything." He sighed, not from disapproval, but from admiration mixed with sorrow. "Julie, this is not revenge, is it?" I smiled then, a quiet, measured smile. "It's not revenge if you simply stop feeding the hand that bites you." Richard nodded. "I can set it up within the week. You'll need to sign the beneficiary exclusion clause yourself. It will be irrevocable." "Good," I said. "Irrevocable sounds peaceful." He looked at me carefully. "Then tell me why now? After all these years?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the crumpled photograph of my husband, the one Charlotte had once sneered at when she saw it on my shelf. "Because the people who called me an old mare will soon remember who built their stable, and when they come crawling back, I want them to find the door locked." For the first time that morning, Richard laughed a deep, genuine laugh that filled the tiny cafe with warmth. "You always had a poet's edge, Julie." "No," I said. "Just a teacher's patience. It's taken me 75 years to teach one last lesson." We talked through the details, signatures, offshore filings, transfers, and clauses. He promised me discretion. I trusted him, not because of the law, but because he still looked at me as if I were worth listening to. When everything was said, I reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "Richard," I said, my voice almost a whisper, "promise me this trust will live longer than my bitterness." He nodded, his fingers curling gently around mine. "It will, Julie, and one day, those who mocked you will learn that silence can be louder than rage." I stood to leave, the air outside cutting sharp against my face, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me, the bell over the cafe door chimed again, echoing like a punctuation mark on a life I was finally rewriting. As I walked back toward the station, the wind picked up, sweeping dust across the street. I tightened my coat, whispering to the cold air, "Let them call me a mare. Soon, they'll learn every old horse remembers the way home and how to kick the gate down." Months passed quietly. The papers were signed, accounts shifted, and silence became my weapon. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not even Richard. Some wars are best fought without a sound. A full year passed before the storm I had quietly set in motion began to rise. It started as rumors that Stephen's construction firm was in trouble. At first, I thought they were exaggerations. Then I saw the headlines in the local paper. Bennett & Co. faces bankruptcy amid tax investigations. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe differently. Because when people sow arrogance, they always harvest collapse. Charlotte stopped visiting the stable months before. She said the smell made her nauseous. The truth was, she couldn't stand seeing me still alive when her empire was starting to rot. I had watched them from a distance, their cars getting cheaper, the dinners smaller, the laughter thinner. When the letters from the bank finally arrived, the shouting began. I could hear every word from the stable door. "Stephen, do something, they can't take the house." Charlotte's voice cracked. "I've tried, the investors pulled out. You're the CEO, fix it, or we'll be on the street." Then there was silence, followed by a sound that I hadn't heard in years, Stephen crying. The same muffled, broken sob from when he was a boy and his father died. The next morning, 2 men in suits arrived, their black sedan parked in front of the house like a hearse. They handed Charlotte an envelope, the official notice of foreclosure. Their home was being seized by the bank within 30 days. But the real blow came a week later, when the papers revealed the buyer who had acquired their mortgage. Solar West Energy, LLC. Charlotte's face went white when she read the name. "Who the hell are they?" she screamed, waving the notice in the air. "Stephen, find out who owns this company." He didn't have to. Richard Cole's name was printed on the legal representation line. 3 days later, the Bennetts were summoned to a debt hearing in Reno District Court. I came too, sitting quietly in the back row. The marble floor echoed with Charlotte's heels as she entered, her chin high, her fury trembling just beneath the surface. Stephen looked older, smaller somehow, his shoulders caving in under the weight of his own choices. When Richard stepped forward to represent Solar West, Charlotte exploded. "This is ridiculous. I demand to know who the real owner is. Who's behind this company?" Richard's voice was calm, professional. "Of course," he said, opening a folder. "The principal shareholder of Solar West Energy LLC is Mrs. Julie Bennett." The courtroom fell silent. You could hear the shuffling of papers and Charlotte's sharp inhale. She turned slowly toward me, eyes wide with disbelief and something darker fear. "You?" she hissed. "You bought our debt? You?" Stephen's mouth opened, but no words came out. His face had gone pale as the walls. "Mom, where did you get the money?" I stood, my hands steady on the cane. "From gratitude, Stephen," I said quietly. "The kind you forgot." Charlotte laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound. "You old lunatic, you think this makes you powerful? You've destroyed your own family." I looked at her, this woman who had once called me a mare, who had taught my grandson to forget the word grandma. "No, Charlotte," I said, my voice even. "I'm cleaning the stable, and sometimes, to live clean, you have to shovel the filth out of your home." The judge banged his gavel for order, but the moment had already burned itself into the room. Outside the courthouse, the winter air was sharp and thin. Stephen followed me down the steps, his voice shaking. "Mom, please, you don't have to do this. Let us fix it." "Fix it?" I turned to him. "You can't fix what you refuse to see. You let her treat me like dirt. You locked me in a stable and called it generosity. You fed your pride while I slept beside dust. That's what needs fixing." He swallowed hard, tears catching in his eyes. "I thought I was protecting my family." "Then learn the difference between a roof and a cage," I said, and walked away. In the weeks that followed, the bank finalized the transfer. Their house, the same one where Charlotte had thrown her parties, where I wasn't allowed past the kitchen door, was now legally owned by the Bennett Trust under Solar West Energy. Richard handled every detail flawlessly. He called me one afternoon to confirm. "It's done," he said. "They have 30 days to vacate." I nodded on the other end of the line. "Good. But Richard, make sure they understand they're not being thrown out, they're being freed." He chuckled softly. "You always did have a way with words, Julie." I spent those 30 days in silence, watching the moving trucks come and go. Charlotte tried to put on a brave face for the neighbors, spinning lies about downsizing and business restructuring. But her eyes betrayed her. They were full of rage and disbelief that the old woman in the barn had outsmarted her. One afternoon, she stomped out to the stable, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Are you proud of yourself?" she shouted. "You've humiliated us." I looked up from my chair. "No, Charlotte, you humiliated yourself. I just turned the lights on so everyone could see it." She trembled with anger. "You're going to die alone, you know that?" I smiled faintly. Better alone than surrounded by people who mistake cruelty for strength. She turned and stormed off, the door slamming behind her so hard that dust fell from the rafters. The next morning, Stephen came alone. His voice was softer. "Mom, I didn't know she'd gone that far. I should have stopped it." "You should have remembered who raised you," I said gently, "but it's not too late to remember who you are." He looked down at his hands. "What are you going to do with the house?" "Nothing for now," I answered. "Maybe one day I'll fill it with people who understand gratitude." He nodded, defeated. "I guess I deserve this." I touched his arm. "No one deserves cruelty, Stephen, but everyone deserves consequence." When he left, I watched his car drive away and felt no triumph, no revenge, only the calm that comes after a storm has passed. Richard visited later that evening, bringing a bottle of sweet tea and 2 paper cups. "You did it," he said, sitting beside me. "I just did what they taught me to do," I replied. "Clean up after the mess." He raised his cup in a quiet toast. "To justice, then." I lifted mine and smiled. "To peace the kind that doesn't need to shout." As night fell over Nevada, the house lights dimmed for the last time. From the stable, I could see my reflection in the window, faint but steady. The old mare had not only survived the winter, she had taken back the reins. The morning they came to me was gray and windless, the kind of day when even the air seems to wait for something to break. I heard the sound of a car before I saw it, the tires crunching slow over the gravel drive, stopping at the same spot where, a year earlier, I had stood holding my suitcase, waiting for someone to say, "Welcome home." Charlotte stepped out first, dressed in what used to be her good coat, though it hung loose on her now. Stephen followed, eyes lowered, shoulders curved inward as if he were carrying something far heavier than shame. I was standing outside the stable, pruning the small garden I had made there. The soil was poor, but stubborn things grow where they are told they cannot. I had planted wildflowers in the same dirt where horses once kicked and where Charlotte once said, "Only maggots belong." The blossoms nodded quietly in the chill wind, pink and white against the pale brown earth. "Mom," Stephen called, his voice cracking. I didn't answer right away. I brushed dirt from my hands, finished cutting a dead stem, and turned to face them. "You're early," I said. "The bank's notice gives you until Friday." Charlotte stepped forward, her lips trembling between anger and desperation. "Please, Julie, we just need more time. A few weeks, until Stephen finds new investors." I met her eyes, the same eyes that once watched me wipe up lobster soup from her carpet. "Time," I repeated softly. "You've already taken a year of mine. How much more do you think I owe you?" Stephen's breath caught. "Mom, please," he said, taking another step closer. "We've lost everything. The business, the savings, even Lucas's school had to let him go. We just need a place to stay, just until we get back on our feet." I nodded slowly, letting his words hang there, the way I used to let my students sit in silence after getting an answer wrong. "On your feet," I said. "You mean the same feet that walked me to the barn and locked the door from the outside?" He winced as though I had struck him. "I know I made mistakes, but I didn't mean—" Charlotte cut in, voice rising. "You can't be serious, Julie. You can't just throw your own son out into the street. What kind of mother does that? I stepped closer, until she had to tilt her chin upward to meet my eyes. The kind of mother who was thrown out first, I said. The kind of woman who learned that mercy without respect is just another kind of leash. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Behind her, Stephen's voice broke again, softer this time. Mom, I'm sorry. Richard appeared from behind the car, carrying a briefcase. He'd been waiting for this meeting too. He nodded to me, then to them. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, he said evenly. I believe you know why we're here. The ownership of the property has been officially transferred to the Bennett Trust. Mrs. Bennett, he gestured to me, has full control of the assets. Charlotte's face drained of color. A trust? You mean she's done all this legally? Yes, Richard said, completely. I'm afraid the deed no longer lists either of you. Stephen looked between us, as if hoping one of us would wake him from a nightmare. Then he sank to his knees in the dirt, his voice breaking on the word he hadn't said in years. Mom, please, forgive me. For a long moment, I said nothing. The only sound was the dry flutter of the wildflowers brushing against one another in the wind. I looked down at him, the boy who once clung to my skirt, afraid of thunderstorms. Now, here he was, older, smaller, stripped of pride and comfort. Stephen, I said softly, I don't hate you. He looked up, eyes wet. You don't? No, I said. I don't have the strength left for hate. But I've learned something stronger, that silence, when it comes from truth, can be louder than any cry. He lowered his head again. Charlotte, standing behind him, started to speak but stopped when I raised a hand. Don't, I said. Don't ask me to undo what time has already taught us. Do you remember, Charlotte? You called me useless, an old mare fit for the barn. But look around you now. Even the dirt blooms without your permission. Yet look around you, this place you buried me in has bloomed. The flowers don't need pity, they just needed space to live. Charlotte's gaze flicked toward the garden, then back to me. There was no defiance left, only confusion, an emptiness that comes when cruelty finally runs out of excuses. Richard handed me a folder. These are the final documents, he said quietly. You can decide what happens to the house next. I nodded, then looked back at Stephen. I won't have you sleeping on the street, I said. There's a small guest house down the road. I've arranged for you to stay there for 2 months. After that, you'll find your own way. He blinked, as if unsure he'd heard me right. You'd do that? After everything? I'm not you, I said simply. And I won't become what you made me. He bowed his head. Thank you, Mom. Charlotte started crying, then real tears this time, not the kind she used to use to win sympathy. She took Stephen's hand, and together they turned back toward the car. Before they left, I called out, Stephen? He stopped, turned. Tell Lucas, I said, that the flowers here will still be blooming next spring. If he ever wants to see where kindness grows, he'll know where to find it. He nodded, his lips trembling. As the car drove away, Richard looked at me. You handled that with grace, Julie, he said. Most people would have shouted. I smiled faintly. I've shouted before. It never taught anyone anything. We stood there in the quiet, watching the dust settle from their departure. When he finally left, I stayed behind a while longer, standing before the stable that had once been my prison. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers. The light was softer now, gold spreading across the boards like forgiveness I hadn't meant to offer. I whispered into the breeze, not to anyone living. You see, Henry? They called it a place for worms, but I made it a garden. The wind stirred the blossoms, and for a moment I could almost hear his laughter in it. The stable no longer smelled of rot or dust. The air now carried something lighter, lavender, coffee, and a faint trace of hope. The wooden walls had been sanded smooth, the old rusted hinges replaced with brass that shone in the Nevada sun. Where there had once been cobwebs and silence, there were now curtains fluttering in the breeze, and voices, soft, steady voices of women learning to speak again. I had kept the beams, though. I wanted them to remember where they came from. Every scar on the wood told a story of something that had refused to fall apart. A new sign hung at the gate, carved into cedar and painted by a woman named Ruth, one of the first to move in. Her husband had left her after 40 years because he needed more excitement. She came here trembling, unsure of what to do with her hands. Now she taught others how to paint. The sign read, "Stable of strength, for women once called useless, but never weak." Every word felt like a heartbeat. The center grew quickly. A retired nurse taught first aid. An old librarian organized a reading room. A widow who'd been silent for decades began leading morning walks at sunrise. They came from every corner of the state, some by bus, some by letter, all carrying the same ache. I told them we would not talk about what we lost until we remembered what we still had. Charlotte and Stephen moved 2 towns over, renting a small apartment above a grocery store. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. The last time I saw them, they both looked lighter somehow, not happy, but real. Pain has a way of scraping away the pretense. Maybe that was the beginning of their redemption. Weeks passed, and the garden around the stable began to bloom again. The wildflowers had spread farther than I planted them, stubborn and uninvited, just like me. Some mornings I would find a few of the women sitting in the dirt, their hands buried in the soil, laughing softly like children. Then one afternoon, as I sorted through mail on the porch, I found a small white envelope written in uneven, boyish handwriting. No return address, just my name, Grandma. Inside was a short note and a crayon drawing of a steaming bowl. "Grandma, I miss the smell of your lobster porridge. Mom says we might visit when I'm older. I hope you still make it. I'll help you stir next time. Love, Lucas." I read it 3 times, tracing the crayon lines with my fingers until they blurred. For the first time in a long while, I let myself cry, but they weren't the quiet tears of despair I once knew. These were small, grateful tears, the kind that taste like forgiveness. That evening, I sat outside as the sun slid behind the desert hills. The light poured through the slats of the stable walls, painting everything gold. I thought about the words that had once been thrown at me useless. Old mare, burden, they no longer stung. They had turned into seeds, buried deep in this same dirt, growing into something Charlotte would never understand. Peace without permission. On the day they called me an old mare, I whispered to the horizon, I thought my life was over, but this place is where it began again. The wind picked up, lifting the petals of the flowers like tiny wings. Somewhere in the field, a white horse I had rescued months ago raised its head, watching me. Its mane shimmered in the fading light, its eyes calm and knowing. The laughter of the women faded behind me, replaced by the hum of the desert wind, soft and endless, like forgiveness itself. I walked toward it slowly, running my hand along its neck. It didn't flinch. It just breathed steady, patient, unafraid. I tightened the saddle strap and climbed up. My knees protested, but my heart didn't. The sky turned the color of fire and honey. As we moved through the open field, the air tasted of dust and memory. I could see the stable behind me, glowing like a lantern in the dusk. The laughter of the women carried faintly in the wind. For the first time in 75 years, I felt no weight on my shoulders, no fear, no shame, only the rhythm of the horse beneath me, steady as my own heartbeat. They moved me into a stable, I said aloud, my voice low and certain, carried off into the desert air. So, I moved my money into a trust. The horse's hooves struck the ground like a drumbeat, each step a punctuation mark to everything I had endured. And for the first time in 75 years, I whispered to the horizon, I am free. The wind answered by lifting my hair from my face, carrying the scent of lavender and earth. The sun dipped lower, setting the sky aflame, and somewhere just beyond sound I could almost hear Henry's voice, warm and proud. Ride, Julie, you've already won. And that, my dear ones, was my story. Not a tale from a book, not a warning whispered through gossip. It was truth quiet, heavy, and hard-earned. They called me an old mare and thought they'd buried me in silence. But silence, when held long enough, becomes an echo that never dies. I didn't fight with fists or fury. I fought by remembering who I was and by letting time carry my justice to the right doorstep. If you've ever been told you're too old, too soft, too late, remember me. Remember that a heart that still beats can still rise. And sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire, it comes with peace, that no one can take away. Thank you for listening, for feeling every word with me. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength or of a woman who deserved to be heard, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories and keep our circle of truth alive. Because every time you listen, every time you share, you're helping another quiet voice find its way out of the dark. I'll be right here, waiting on the porch of memory, ready to tell you the next one. Until then, stay kind, stay strong, and never forget, revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers.